Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here. It's not our fault that they invited so great speakers and they chose a small room for us. I mean, really. We do understand that we're in between you and lunch, so we'll work with that. So we'll get started. So this talk about autonomous team is, everybody talks about autonomous teams. Everybody wants that. A lot of people have an idea that they have that. And this talk comes from our experience. And some of it is there's a lot of management bashing in the Agile community. And both me and Gitte have worked as engineering managers, and we really see the difference that a good manager can do for an organization, for a team. So we've had some shared frustrations. I wrote a blog post beginning of the year about leadership being a skill. I'll talk about that in a moment. Gitte chimed in. We started having, weekly calls, I think? And then Gitte said, this is a talk. And I said, okay. And here we are. Yes, quick intro. My name is Jakob. You can find me on LinkedIn. I do some writing on Medium occasionally. They actually changed the logo after I drew this, which is really annoying. You can send me an email. I've been working as a developer many years ago, and then as an engineering leader. Currently working at a Danish consultancy company called Kraftwerk. Nothing to do with the group. I know. I am Swedish, but I live in Copenhagen.
And my name is Gitte. I started out in testing, technical testing, thought I would be a tester. I actually have my teammate here, Gitte. We used to be in the same team. Moved into Agile coaching, first like transformation shit, but then more into people, collaboration, psychological safety, etc. And worked a lot with leaders and managers. And like Jakob said, we were talking about these things, and turns out we had a lot of the same things to say. So you can find me on Blue Sky, which came alive thanks to Musk meddling with the block function on Twitter. I am Danish, but I live in Sweden. I have my own company called Native Wired, which consists of me. So we wanted to start out with talking about what autonomous teams is. So the first mentioning of this is 1790, where Immanuel Kant talked about self-organization among living organisms. And since then, there's like self-organized, autonomous, self-managed, and there are tons of definitions out there. They don't always agree, but as we say in Danish, a love child has many names. Et kært barn har mange navne. So there are all these definitions of it. So we wanted to kind of say, okay, when we are talking about it in this context, what do we mean? So we mean a team that has the freedom to do as they find best to deliver the goal of the company. It's a team that's been together, preferably for a bit. It has the skills it needs. It takes accountability, which we will be talking about later. And it has a frame, and it stays within, or maybe it doesn't stay within it, but actually it has a defined frame. It has guardrails. This is your area of responsibility. And very often when we talk about autonomous teams, it means do whatever. But actually part of the job of a great manager is to say, this is the direction we're going in. This is the frame for you. These are the guardrails. And I'm here if you need me. Is it always worth it? Because sometimes we talk about this like, this is what we all should be. We should all be autonomous and everything will be fine. And it's not always worth it. First of all, if you have simple tasks, it might not be worth it. It might not be worth having to do all of these things. If you are in an organization that has never tried this before, or you have developers who never tried this before, you have to consider, is this worth it? Do we want to put the work in? Because apparently a lot of people think that you just call them autonomous and then they are. But there's a lot more to it. So you have to go in and evaluate, is this actually worth it for us? What do we expect to get out of it? And it's a long-term investment because it takes a bit of time for it to work. So, like I said, some people say that, it's just going to work. I'm going to quote from a book called Leading Without Blame. It is not enough to communicate, you are empowered, and then walk away. which is a little bit like I've seen it done in a lot of companies. And there's also a little bit of this hands-off management. You are now empowered. I like to call it magic. It also works with if you want everyone new one to become agile or adopt your culture, you just sit them next to other people. And that's how it happens. So that's a lot of the way it's implemented in organizations. But there are 3 basic elements that needs to be in place. The first one is the team. You can't have an autonomous team without a team. And that team needs to be willing to do this. So it's not something that can only come from the top, because if the team is not interested in this or have worked in a different way for way too long, this is not going to work. So we need a team that is willing to do this and willing to take the responsibility, because that's part of it. Autonomy is not just a free card to do everything. With that with the freedom comes the responsibility and the transparency and the visibility. You need a manager who has good management skills, who doesn't manage people, but manages the organization, manages maybe the product, but is a manager for people, helps them by setting frames for them, setting directions, supporting them. If they don't know how to work in an autonomous way, it might be the manager who will help them with this. It requires a lot of skills that a traditional manager might not have, but it also requires some skills that traditional managers have that I think we sometimes forget that we need to look into, because there are a lot of things that we need from managers. And there's a little bit tendency to say the team can just do this, which of course is fine if you have a magic team, but when are they supposed to actually create products if they're supposed to lift everything from, oh, we don't need testers, developers just test. We don't need managers because they can just do all this stuff. We just need some HR and then everything will be fine. First of all, do they have the skills to do these things? Do they want to? Do they have the time? So that's also part of what a manager does, is to create an environment where this is possible. And then as always, there's the system. The system is everything. It can, for instance, be the code base. How is the code base? If you have one big lump, is it good to have 6 autonomous teams? Maybe not. The surroundings, do they accept this? You will be working together with other departments. What about management? What about higher management? What about marketing? So all of these things need to be in place and need to support for this to work. There are also some problem areas that we see, and we run into them again and again. Kind of interesting, I will say we, even though we never worked together, because that's why we ended up having weekly talks, because we realized that we kind of see the same patterns. So the first one is leadership. It is often a problem with leadership. Like Jakob also said, there's been a lot, especially in the agile world, about management being overhead. We don't need managers, and also there's a lot of we need leaders. And you can kind of go in both directions. You can be the micromanaging and going in and telling people what to do. You can also be the other one, where you want everyone to feel nice, which is not good. It's not good to be nice to your developers. You need to be kind to your developers. You need to give them feedback. You need to tell them the frame. And we also need to remember that we actually work in a company. No matter what company you are in, well, almost no matter what company you're in, they still need to create something, or whether it's a service, like literal service like cutting hair, or other services, or products, and make money so they can pay you. There are a few exceptions, but that's what most of it is. And sometimes when we talk about leadership and autonomy, we forget this. But that is why you are there. You're there because you're part of a company. And depending on what kind of leader you have, they might not be able to communicate this. So when we talk about hierarchies, we don't necessarily mean that there's far from the top to wherever. I mean, in Denmark and Sweden, we are fairly flat, at least we pretend to be. But it's more about abstraction levels. When you're at the board level, you don't want to know all the details that the team is working on. So there are different abstraction levels going down. There's the board, there might be a CEO, there's a manager, and there's a team, and there might be a level of managers in between. And part of that hierarchy is that you have different abstraction levels. So part of the job of a great manager is to take what is coming from the organization and kind of funnel it down to the team. The team, I believe the team should have access to almost everything. There are things about, like, let's say you want to have a big firing round, you don't want people to know that. But most of the things, it's okay if people have access to that. Something like strategy, for instance. It's good if the team can go in and look at strategy. But some of my developers, for instance, were so unhappy after coming back from strategy day because it was spoken in strategy language. And most people who don't work on a board or high level do not speak strategy language. And it's hard to relate to whatever you're working with. So that's kind of part of it, is to have that abstraction level. And of course go the other way as well, to kind of condense what the team is doing and having it go the other way. And then alignment. So alignment is super important because you want your company to go in a specific direction. Hopefully you have made that decision. So you need to align somehow, and you can have high alignment or lower alignment, and it's something that's super difficult to do because you kind of want to balance that freedom and alignment. And Jakob will now tell you a story.
Yes, I'll share a story. So alignment is really important if you're working with autonomous teams. And I want to share a story of an organization where I worked. We had autonomous teams. These teams were great. They were autonomous in the sense that they were cross-functional. So we had developers in all the stacks needed to solve all the problems. There were designers. There was a product manager, so the team could together decide what they would build and for who they would build. We had testers. Like, everybody needed to solve the problems that the teams would face were in there. We had a microservice architecture, so the teams could work decoupled. And this was all great. This was a great thing, and the teams kind of chugged away and built features and delivered, and this was all fine and dandy until we started seeing some symptoms. So one of the symptoms, for example, was that at one point we had this one team working on a new bet for the company. And they were trying things out, they were testing, they were sending out small things, they were using A/B testing and trying to figure out what would stick. But they hadn't really delivered any real features to customers. And then we had this other team. This other team was working on something that was absolutely business critical, something that was very important for the business model for the company. It was on a strict deadline. They were cutting corners, they were working long hours, where this team was just chugging along. And we never really discussed the priorities between these two different tasks. I mean, the teams were autonomous, right? So these guys are doing something and these guys are doing something else. Another thing that we discovered was we had these microservices. And at one point we took a step back and we realized we have a lot of microservices. And we realized that these microservices are written in C#, F#, Java, Kotlin, Go, and probably something else. Suddenly, we've built technical silos between the teams, making it almost impossible for one team to help another out because they're doing something else over there with a totally different tech stack, and I have no idea. So we were over here. If you plot autonomy on one scale and on one axis and alignment on one axis, we had high autonomy, but low alignment. We realized that we needed to be over here. We needed high autonomy and high alignment. Easy, right? Well, the way to get there is this. I call this the dead smiley. You need to reduce the autonomy to get to high alignment. And this is painful. Doing this, unraveling what autonomous teams have been doing for years, that's a lot of pain. Now, in this situation, we ended up defining a golden path for how microservices should be built, and we said no more F# because actually nobody codes F# in the company anymore. Those guys have left, so kill those things. And we had to make some really hard choices and say, this is how we're going to build microservices. This is your frame from now on. And you can be autonomous, but it's within this frame. We started having weekly or bi-weekly things where we looked across the whole tech organization and saying, what initiatives are we running right now, and what should we prioritize, and do we need to help each other out? So getting to this is really hard and requires a lot of hard work and a different type of leadership. So if you take the next one. So I wanted to share different types of leadership based on the book Leadership Agility by Bill Joyner and Stephen Josephs. So they actually define more types, but I think these are really good in terms of showing you the difference. So we all know the expert leader. The expert leader is the great developer that was promoted to manager. And they were promoted because they were great developers. We've all worked with those people, and they're great. That's usually how you start out. That's usually how you get into management. But the expert leader, the style of the expert leader is the expert knows the solution to the problem. And I will make others follow my instructions. I will duplicate myself and just make sure that more people work on the task so that we can work in parallel and get this thing done. The achiever leader is an evolution of the expert leader. So the achiever leader will make a diagnosis and then set a goal and say, I decide that we're going towards this goal. And this is where you get to, we need to align on this goal. We need to buy into this. I need to motivate my team to go for this goal. We need to measure the results. And this is very much an analogy of competition. We need to beat that other team, or we need to make these OKRs and show that we've done this great. Now, these two leadership styles, I'm not saying they're bad. They actually work very well in some conditions. But I call them heroic leadership styles because they are extremely dependent on the manager. Which means if the manager goes away, these are the managers, by the way, that burn out and can never go on a vacation because everything depends on the manager. Everything depends on the manager defining the solution to the problem, setting the goals, etc., etc. But if you want autonomous teams, these leadership styles don't really work. Then you need something of a catalyst leader. So a catalyst leader focuses on the system. A catalyst leader focuses on the culture, on experimentation, on facilitation, on coaching, learning. They don't know the solution to the problem. And they can accept failure and think much more long-term. And the analogy here is much more about collaboration and going for what Liz Wiseman calls the multiplier effect. So the multiplier effect is basically making other people smarter than yourself. You're not the smartest person in the room. You need to make space and help others grow. But this type of leader can go on a vacation because their work is long-term. They equip the team with what they need to make decisions on their own. They train them in that and create a truly autonomous team.
The interesting part about this is that they often become invisible because they are not the ones doing the work. They are the ones supporting the team, they are the ones coaching them, they are the ones setting the frames, they are the ones working in the organization for this to work. But they can be very invisible, especially to higher leadership. The other ones are very visible, which also means that they get promoted. So sometimes when we have these really, really good managers who know how to be good managers and good leaders, they will actually maybe stay at the lowest level because they are invisible, where they could do so much good in a different organization.
So we've already mentioned, and we will mention a few more times, autonomy is hard work. It does not come for free. And as Gitte said, 3 basic ingredients, the system and the team and the manager. And the team you need for a team to be autonomous is not just any team. You cannot build an autonomous team of junior developers. Trust me, I've seen that fail. It does not work. You need a skilled team that knows how to solve problems. They need to have the experience. They need to have the competence and skills to solve whatever comes their way. They also need to understand, if they are going to make a lot of decisions, they need to understand the whole system. They need to understand the business that we're in. They need to understand how this company is making money and how we as a team are contributing to that. Otherwise, you cannot make these autonomous decisions. But you also need a great manager. And you need a manager that kind of sets the context, but also make sure that the team has the skills. It's the manager's responsibility to make sure that the right people are on the team and that the wrong people are off the team. You need a manager that can make those decisions. The manager will need to give up a lot of power and trust the team so that they can make their own decisions. So they need to not lead the work, not lead the people, but they need to lead the system. So this is much about systems thinking. And then management is much more than the administration. Management is a skill, and so is leadership. So getting to this type of management and the catalyst leadership, that doesn't come natural. Trust me, if you've ever been in a leadership position, it's not a natural thing. It takes years of experience. But leadership is a skill that can be trained. We should train it, and we should really make an effort to become better leaders. And we can. And I get rashes every time somebody talks about soft skills. Because with soft skills comes the idea that, you know, everybody can do leadership. It's a soft skill. Everybody has this. And then we compare that to the hard skills of technology and databases and coding. But honestly, if you read the books and if you go online and if you take the courses, the hard skills are so much easier to pick up than the soft skills. So I call leadership a difficult skill. And it's a skill that you can practice. It's a skill that you can deliberately make better. One of the basic ingredients to good leadership is accountability.
So, Jakob did all our drawings, so I asked, can you make me 3 cowboys? Because when I talk about accountability, a lot of people go like, whew, accountability, that's just the worst. But that's because most of the accountability we hear about is, here, you have accountability. If something goes wrong, you are the one to blame, which is bad accountability. So some of you might not be old enough, but there's a movie called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. It is super long. Watch something else with Clint Eastwood. They're much better movies. But there are 3 kinds of accountability, and we want the good kind. The good kind is when we have an agreement. When we agree that this is what you take responsibility for. And we have an agreement on that. And as a manager, it's also good to follow up on it. Because otherwise you have this organization where as a team, I've been in a team like that, you feel like nobody actually cares what you do. But having that agreement and following up, because accountability is not about who do we blame. It is about taking responsibility, among other things. As I said, we have the bad responsibility where, you get here's your accountability. If something goes wrong, we'll blame you. The ugly one is you're not told, but you're still blamed. We don't want that either. That way, sorry. And when we talk about accountability, we often talk about the responsibility part. You are taking responsibility for something. And which is true. You are taking responsibility as a team for the things that you are creating. You should also take responsibility for asking for help when you need it. There's a lot of things in that. But the other part that we tend to forget is to give account, which means talk about how things are going. And it's up to the team how they want to do this. You can say, yeah, they will go to the manager once a day and say, hey, now we've done this. Probably not a good way to give account. You can have a traffic light so that people can immediately see how are things going. And one of the reasons for this is that if you do not give account, the only way the manager can figure out is to come and ask you or go through your things. And that's not what we want. We want the manager to be the one spending time on the system instead. So giving account and having that kind of develop up to the abstraction layers is super important. And it's something that we rarely talk about. And also, I saw it described the other day as the watermelon status, because it's green, but it's really red inside. So it has to be honest and transparent. Because if I've seen way too many projects, especially when I was in IBM, was like green, 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 green. Oh, we're almost going to deliver. Damn, it's red. And we knew all along. But, our salesman had already sold this, so we had to make it. but giving account in a good way so that the organization knows what's going on. So one of the things we wrote about in our abstract is also, what should you look out for if you're a team and you want autonomy? Because not everyone wants autonomy, especially not when they hear it also comes with responsibility and transparency. So there are some signs to look out for. I'm putting it the wrong way. Like I said, forced accountability. If like you're autonomous teams, you are responsible for this. That is forced accountability. That's not good. If it's not something you feel like you have the opportunity or the skills to take responsibility for, or you feel like it's out of your scope, have discussions about that. But if it's forced, that's something to look out for. Micromanagement. Someone saying, hey, you're autonomous, you need to do this, which is also seen. But I've also seen the other one where we want the team to feel nice, so we do hands-off management. Because the team is autonomous, they know what to do. That's also bad. If you have that, that's also a bad sign. And that's actually one of the reasons we started talking about why we need more managers. Because leadership and management are skills. There's a bunch of skills connected to that. And a lot of our managers in general do not learn these skills. We talked to someone at a different conference who said the average time from becoming a manager to getting your first training is 10 years. Which sounds ridiculous. But I've worked with managers who, like, during these times have to do salary negotiations and never learned how to have a difficult conversation. Because they were developers or salespeople who were the best at that, so they got promoted. The lack of support. So that can be the lack of support in the organization, like, does your manager actually have your back? But it can also be in the whole organization, because you can't have one team that actually wants that freedom if it's not respected around, if there's not that support. Like I said before, you might have marketing who has a campaign. And if you don't have the freedom within that, then this is a warning sign. It could also be one of the frames that you have is that we have marketing campaigns. I worked for Lego, which is also my hobby. Not working for them, but building it. And they make stuff for Christmas. So if you want to have things out on the web page and stuff, whatever, it has a deadline. I worked with a big team a way ago in Denmark when American Express for private people was taken off the Danish market. That had to happen at New Year's. That's a frame, and sometimes you can't do something about it, but if there's no support. And in this case, what happened was we evaluated it all the time. 3 months before, we realized that the team was behind, and we got another team to help. But if you can't find these things, and if there's no support, that's also a sign. And then the interesting part is decisions are overruled. So having a manager who says, so what do you want to do about this? And then the team picks the wrong decision. Someone said, if there is no choice, don't ask people. But you will sometimes have this, like, you are free to do these things. And then you realize the decision they made, you go like, no, not that one. So if decisions are overruled, we're actually conditioning people to not make decisions because it doesn't matter. And there is more. Of course, there's more. Should you do something about this? Now you already saw my answer. It depends. I am a certified it depends practitioner. It depends. Do you care enough? At the moment, for instance, where we have a tough market in a lot of countries, maybe you don't want to do something about it. If it's easy to get a job, it's much easier to make that decision. Do you care? Or are you fine? Yeah, I can work in a team if I have to. I can work on my own if I have to. It's fine. Probably not do something about it. So that care and that, is it important to you, is something that you need to take into consideration. Like, why pick a fight if you don't really care about the result? Is it worth your investment? How slow is this organization? How are the surroundings? What kind of manager do I have? Is this something worth fighting for? Or should I just do whatever? Which a lot of people in the world are doing right now. there are more disengaged people in the workforce than ever. Not just unengaged, but disengaged. And if you have a bad system, it beats a good team. Because a team is just part of a big thing, which is also why a manager needs to know systems theory, or at least know about system theory, know that things are connected. In the beginning, when I was called in to work with teams as an agile coach, it was like, fix this team. But that's fine. We can make a team nice, and we can make them effective and efficient, but it doesn't help if the organization is not ready for it. So if the system is not good, you can have the best team in the world, and it doesn't matter.
So as part of this talk, we would like to make a call for action. There's a lot of people in this room, and a lot of people can make a lot of difference. So we think if you're working in a team, if you're part of an organization, you can be part of making the frame and the alignment, make that visible, make that explicit. It's there, trust me, it's there. It might not be written down, but it's always there. There is some frame where you can move within. So if you can help make that explicit and known to everyone, it's much easier to know what your autonomy looks like. And know the direction and purpose. What is the purpose of your team? And I don't mean the statements or the fancy things that comes out of a workshop. What is it that your team is supposed to be solving? What's the purpose of your organization? What's the value that you bring to your customers or to the world? Again, make that explicit and make that understandable. Not in a fancy sentence, but just so that everybody aligns and understands that. And help the organization find these if they're not explicit. Even if you're not the manager, even if you're not the CEO of the company, there's a lot of things that you can do in this.
And show up and contribute. If you want things to be autonomous, you have to show up. You have to be part of this. And going in and actually figuring out, do we have these things, is part of that. Take that responsibility. We can only change things we take responsibility for. We can take a step back, and then we have no chance of changing anything or taking influence. But if we step up and take responsibility, we at least have a chance to change things. And then stop and evaluate continuously. Very often, I see people do retrospectives because that's what we're supposed to do, and we do it at the end of a sprint. And not everyone actually knows what it's supposed to do. But stopping and evaluating, for me, is the core of Agile and should be the core of all workplaces. We do it very often, and we decide to do things the same way or differently, depending on what we find out. So do this also as a team. Is this working for us? As an organization, stop and evaluate. And then use the influence that you have. Because you have a lot more influence than you think. And try to make decisions that is either something you can do directly or you can influence. If you are a team, for instance, depending on another team and that team is behind, you can go into your retrospective and complain about the other team and those other people. Or you could go and say, hey, we know that you're a little bit behind. Would you like to have one of us come over and help you the next 2 iterations? You have an option to go in and influence things. And you have to remember that you have so much more influence than you think. And you will never get it unless you ask. And yes, there are organizations where I would not ask about things, where I would not comment on things. But in most organizations, there are a lot of things that you can influence.
All right. We've been through a lot of things, a lot of material in this talk. So just wanted to do a little wrap up, get this idea with the mummy. Autonomous teams are an investment. And it might not be worth it, and it might not be possible. So really consider, do you want to do this investment? There is gold at the end of the rainbow, but it takes a lot of effort to get there.
Autonomy and accountability does pair up. If you want true autonomy, you need to also have accountability. And both ways. You need to have accountability as a team, but you also need to have accountability as an organization, as a manager.
And you need a mature and skilled team for it to be autonomous.
Doesn't mean you can't have any juniors, because we should also have juniors in our teams, because how else are we going to grow the next generation of developers? And how else are they going to help us learn new stuff when we think we know everything because we've been doing this for 20 years?
And you need a mature and skilled manager, because a manager just starting out will not be able to help and create an autonomous team.
And then they need to be properly trained. And there are things like even empathy can be trained. So no matter how soft you think it is, it can probably be trained. And they need to learn the hard stuff as well. They need to learn, at the moment, how to fire people, for instance, which is the job of a manager. So there are things that are super difficult. My worst is to do administration. I hate that. I also hate firing people. I don't like it, but I can.
And management is a difficult skill. It is a highly valued, difficult skill that you can learn, and you can be a better manager.
You always have a choice. A lot of people say, no, I don't have a choice. But you do. You might not like the consequences of that choice, but you do have a choice. Had this been 3 years ago, I would be talking to someone, they'll say like, but I can't quit my job. I can't afford it. It's like, yes, you can. You just can't afford going to Madeira or Thailand twice a year. You have a choice that you can make. Make it an active choice. If you decide to stay in this, make it an active choice. And you can choose to leave, and you can choose to live differently. So know which of the choices you make, but don't say that you don't have a choice.
So here are some of the books that we reference in this talk. I'll give you a second to take pictures. These are all great books. There's tons and tons and tons of books on this topic. So these are some of the good ones. Here's a unicorn, because Gitte said we can't have a presentation without a unicorn. So here's one. There's a link to Gitte's post on authentic leadership, and then my original post on leadership being a skill. We're around for most of the conference. We like coffee. We talk too much, so come and join us on that.
We actually have 5 minutes for questions as well.
Or just early lunch, I mean.
See, no, he... but
Go ahead.
Going back to your dead smiley picture.
Yes.
I really recognize sort of the setup with a lot of diverse tech stacks and what autonomy sort of the effects of.
Yeah.
And also the misalignment of business priorities, etc. So you mentioned quite a few things to bring autonomy down in the smiley, like aligning on the tech stacks and languages and also on business priorities, etc. So what makes it then go up?
So.
One part of the question. The other part is like, what does autonomy then look like when it is sort of contained within boundaries and priorities? And what do you gain then?
I think it goes.
So the question is, when you look at the happy smiley, we talked about what happens when you go down, but how do you actually, the dead smiley. How do you actually go up again, and what does it look like?
So I think this goes back to a few of the things that Gitte said about hierarchies, about different things being decided at different levels. So to me, this is, if you create that alignment, that happens probably on a level above you. And being able to understand, so for example, with microservices, if we decide from now on all microservices will be written in Java, like it or not. But within Java and how you write it, that's totally up to you. So you have to make some of these things explicit and then allowing the team to make a lot of decisions in that. I think we should stop here, and then we can do more questions afterward. Thank you so much for coming, and enjoy your lunch.